Hello everybody, hope you're all doing well. It's Lane here with MetaShackle. Today I'm going to be going over the XRP charts, but I also want to touch on the Bitcoin chart really quick, just to kind of help you understand what I'm thinking, as right now the general crypto market is turning very bearish. And I'm still not in that bear camp quite yet. I do think we are still going to see a move upwards first to generate additional liquidity for the big positions to close out their trades, as well as provide liquidity for them to go short, which will ultimately compound the selling and make the downside move that we are going to see afterwards much, much bigger. So let's not waste any more time and let's get into the charts. For additional information and exclusive perks, do consider joining me and the rest of our community on Patreon. So taking a look at the Bitcoin chart, we came up here, set the all-time high. Price came down, got rejected off of this bearish SIBI right here on the daily chart. Price also formed this bearish order block right here. Price rejected and came down to the levels that we're seeing now, trading within this perfectly defined channel that you can see right here on the charts. Price has come down in a nice 5-wave Elliott Wave move fashion, but if you take a close look at this right here at the bottom where price is currently trading, price is stuck between this bearish SIBI on the daily as well as this order block on the daily, kind of pinballing in here. But this does not look finished to me. This flat right here does not look finished to me. With the bottom being right here, marking the termination of the fifth wave currently, it looks to me like what we're going to see is another minor push to the downside, pushing us down into these lower fib levels right here, which would essentially fill this bullish fair value gap on the 4-hour chart, taking a draw on liquidity out of this bullish order block. Now I still believe, and I have not changed my opinion one iota, that we are going to come up here and fill this CME gap on the daily chart first. There's 2 trades that I'm watching for. And keep in mind that I'm not married to any scenario, and my scenarios will change with the charts if that's what is required. But this is what I'm watching currently. I'm looking to short from this area after this CME gap is filled. So I'm thinking price will come down here, bottom out here, finishing off this fifth wave, then recover, moving up into this area, and getting rejected after filling this CME gap right here. At that point, I think that's when we will see the big move to the downside. And let's not forget that there is another CME gap resting right down here, centered at about 92,222. I do believe that that's where we're going to go. Come up to this area, get the ultimate rejection, then we are going to move down here to the downside, filling this CME gap, taking a draw on liquidity at this bullish fair value gap. Then, at that point, I believe what we will end up seeing is price reversing coming up, and then afterwards setting a new all-time high, pushing into that 130, 135, 36,000 range, represented by the Fibonacci levels right here. Now I know a lot of people have turned bearish, and a lot of people believe that we are just going to continue to drop from this point moving down to this gap. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think we need to generate the liquidity moving up here to keep the bulls on the hook in order for these big positions to continue to exit their trades at higher prices, selling out of their longs, and then opening their short positions. And by doing that, they are going to need the additional liquidity, which would come from taking this price back up into here before the move down. That way they can get a better price on their exits, and they can maximize their short. And with the big dogs going short here, essentially selling into the market, as soon as the bulls realize they've been had, because they're going to be thinking that we're moving up here to set a new all-time high, so everybody's going to get super bullish again, thinking that we're going to go see a blow-off top or something to that effect. But once it reverses and starts to move to the downside, they'll start to panic and sell out of their positions. So between the shorts selling into the market and the long positions selling into the market, we will get a spiraled move to the downside, rapid move to the downside, pushing us down towards this CME gap. So it would seem to make sense to me that we would have one last push coming down here to these fib levels before seeing an ABC type of correction right here, then the move to the downside. And with Bitcoin, it's likely to take the vast majority of the market with it. So how does all of this apply to the XRP chart? Well, if we look at the XRP chart right now, you can see that we have an Elliott Wave, 5-wave impulse to the upside, trading within this well-defined channel right here, which is now touched twice on the first and the third termination, once on the bottom on the second termination, and is very close to touching on what could be the 4th wave termination right here. If you watched the last video that I released on my Patreon for free to all members, I talked about that I believed this low right here was going to be swept, which has now come to fruition, because at that time, this wave 4 termination point was sitting right here. Now that this low has come down, taking out this low, it moves the termination point of the 4th wave down to here. But it doesn't quite look like it's finished to me. Generally, the 4th wave will retrace from 0.382 to the 0.5 level of the full length of the 3rd wave, which in this point it has already crossed past the 0.382 and is resting just above the 0.5. Now keep in mind, this line right here represents the wave 1 termination point. So we do not want it to cross this line, otherwise this likely would not be a wave 4, but could actually be an extended wave 3, which I also talked about in my last video. That has not occurred yet, but that is a possibility. But it does look like to me that it's very possible that we could actually see this wave C come down, sweep this low, and break into these lower fib levels, taking a bigger draw on liquidity out of this bullish fair value gap. Likely somewhere right here around the 1.618. It doesn't have to happen, but it looks like it could happen. Now, if this does come down and breaks through this wave 1 termination point right here and actually comes down to the 0.5, which I think is the least likely scenario at this point, but still could happen, then that essentially could create what would be an extended wave 3. And although I don't think that's the most likely scenario, this is what we would see if that was the case, to where instead of this being the termination of the 3rd wave and this being the 4th wave right where we were just looking, this would actually be subwaves trading within that 3rd wave, which means that we would likely see another 5-wave move to the upside, completing the 3rd wave, rather than this being the 5th wave as it appears to be right now. Now, like I said, I think this is the least likely scenario. But if we break below the wave 1 termination point, this would be the next scenario. So it's something that we have to keep in mind, and if this occurs, we'll revisit this later. But this is just something to think about in the current moment, but it has not yet come to the point to where this is an option. So it kind of gives us this scenario to where we've got this 4th wave right here, terminating right here, near these Fibonacci's. If we do get a push down, pushing to the 1.618 here, this will go a little bit lower into this fair value gap, completing the ABC right here, of which then we would see the 5th wave coming out, which is likely to be the final move before we see the downside move. Now, if Bitcoin does move up to fill that CME gap at that 117,000 to 119,000 range, this 5th wave could correlate right there with that same move. Over the last about 6 weeks or so, I've been looking at that $4.75 to $5 range, but I've underestimated it just a little bit right here, just to be on the safe side. But we also have to consider the fact, if the bullishness dies off and we don't quite have the momentum that we need to push up to these fib levels, we very well could have a truncated 5th, which means this 5th wave right here would actually fall short of breaking past the all-time high. It could come up here and do something like this where it just sweeps it. It could fall short of it. So keeping an eye on the momentum right here is absolutely going to be key to keeping an eye on, because it might not get up to this point. But if we look here at the stochastic, could actually be setting up for this move as it's well in the oversold territory as well. after completing this fifth wave, then I think this wave will correspond with what I just talked about in Bitcoin, where we will see a massive drop. Now I have it marked right here at this underlying trend line, but it very well could go beyond that. I simply just marked it at this to use as an example. So this isn't set in stone. This is basically just to give you the idea of what I'm thinking. And another thing that goes along with this idea is you can see that right here on the stochastic, we have a hidden bullish divergence forming between this point here and this point here, which essentially would go from this point to this point, which is corresponding from this point here to this point here for this entire breakout move. Now this has actually happened before when we go back to the initial breakout from the Trump election pump. If you look from this point right here where the breakout was, moving to this point right here, you can see the exact same thing. A downward move on the stochastic compared to an upward move in the price action, forming a hidden bullish divergence, to which we then had the breakout moving into the territory we're seeing now. So we have that exact same thing forming on the chart as we speak in regard to this point here and this point here. So there's quite a few things on the charts right now shaping up that could lead us to believe that at a bare minimum we're going to see this fifth wave move to the upside before we see a dramatic move to the downside. And as I mentioned, if the price does break down, crossing this wave 1 termination, the only way this pattern would be able to remain valid is if in fact it was a subwave moving below that wave 1 termination point, which would mean that the only possibility left for this particular pattern would be the extended third wave. But I don't think we're going to have enough momentum to pull that off. It seems to make a lot of sense with the charts that this could in fact be the extended third wave, which is what I would like to see occur, which could potentially push us up to these fib levels right here in the $6 range. But I just don't know if we have the momentum to get there. Now there are some exceptions to this, because if Bitcoin is pushing up to a higher level and moves back up to fill that CME gap, we could see a situation where money's coming out of Bitcoin and Ethereum and pushing into XRP instead, which could give it that additional momentum that we need to push higher, which could get us up into this area right here. But if this does turn into an extended third wave, it just seems very unlikely that it would be able to get up to this level without a lot of momentum and a lot of additional capital coming into XRP. So I think the most likely scenario is this fifth wave to the upside. So out of those two trades that I'm eyeing, this is the number one trade, with a long position on XRP potentially up here towards the all-time high, with the additional potential to make it up to these fib levels depending on how much momentum we have. If the momentum seems weak, I will ladder out of that position right before we get to the all-time high, because we could fall short of it with the truncated fifth. Ending in this area here somewhere, we could even just sweep it and then see the move to the downside. But if we get a strong move coming up out of here, I will likely ladder out some of my position, then use a trailing stop on the rest in an attempt to capture the rest of this move here. That way I can limit my risk. And at that point, once this trade was closed out, that's when I would be switching over to my second trade, which is to short Bitcoin from the upper CME gap down to the lower CME gap. So those are the two trades that I'm looking for. There's no guarantee this is going to happen. I'm certainly not married to this idea, and it could change at any time if the charts change. But it's what I'm looking at, it's what I'm thinking about, and it's what I'm planning for, so if it does come to fruition, I can in fact make these trades. So keep that in mind. If this comes to fruition, that's what I'll be doing. If it doesn't, I'm simply just going to move on to the next idea. But one thing you always have to keep in mind when trading and investing is you cannot be married to any particular idea, because they can change. Yes, I might be expecting this to come down here just a little bit lower into these fib levels, but there's a good chance that this right here could actually be the termination point of the wave 4. So even though I'm looking for it to come down into these fib levels. It doesn't necessarily have to, but I'm prepared for both outcomes. And if both of these fail and the price drops down here and breaks the wave 1 termination point, then I also know what the third potential option is. And regardless of any of these options and plans that I might be making, I'm also very aware of the possibility for a black swan event or something else that could cause this to happen. So I'm basically just looking at things from multiple different vantage points. But all in all, I think that's what we're going to see, is something in that realm. I think the odds favor this being the termination point of the fourth wave, whether it's sitting right here at current price action or whether it pushes down just a little bit more. That's the most likely scenario. But keep your eye on this wave 1 termination point represented by this white line here, because if it crosses this, the only option remaining would be the extended wave 3. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Have a great day and stay out of trouble.